It is a truth universally acknowledged, though rarely voiced at the breakfast table, that a corpse is infinitely more obliging when discovered in the drawing room than in the scullery. For one thing, the rugs tend to be of superior quality, and for another, the lighting is generally more forgiving. So it was, on an unseasonably brisk Tuesday morning in October, that Lord Peter Wimsey, having just arrived at Fenchurch Parva for what he had hoped would be an insipid weekend of tepid shooting and tepid conversation, found himself instead contemplating the body of Miss Lavinia Trafford, aged 58, late of Deverell House, now very late indeed. "She always did say," observed Miss Cicely Forbes, who had been poised to pour the tea when the butler found the body, "that nothing was so vulgar as dying in the night, and I suppose she has kept to that. Morning death is so much more hygienic." Wimsey, who had up until that moment been absorbed in a trifling debate with the vicar about the precise moment at which Virgil begins to go off in the Georgics, lifted his monocle and gazed with faint curiosity toward the chaise longue. Upon it reclined the aforementioned Miss Trafford, upright but in an attitude suggestive less of polite repose and more of sudden, disagreeable arrest. Her head lolled at an unnatural angle against the antimacassar, and a slight but noticeable foam lingered at the corner of her lips. Said Wimsey, folding his long frame into a kneeling crouch beside the chaise and peering at her with something between scholarly interest and aesthetic distaste. "Belladonna, do you think? Or perhaps digitalis? Always difficult to say before breakfast." The vicar, Reverend Pargeter, looked faint. "Lord Peter, really? She was perfectly well, not an hour ago. She had just come down, said something about the chrysanthemums being late this year, and then collapsed. As one does when one's engagements have run out," said Wimsey, dryly. He stood and retrieved a half-filled champagne flute from the side table, sniffed it with theatrical delicacy, then pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed the rim. "You'll forgive me, Miss Forbes," he said, turning back to the niece, "but I rather thought you were bringing the champagne last night, not this morning." Miss Cicely Forbes flushed. "Of course I brought it last night. What an absurd thing to say. I left it in the cooler in the breakfast room." "Ah, well, one never knows what the help gets up to after hours," murmured Wimsey, his eyes briefly flicking to the butler, who stood, grey-faced and rigid as a memorial tablet, just beyond the tea-trolley. "Was this the bottle in question?" I suppose so," she said. "I only brought one. Aunt Lavinia liked a single glass in the morning. It was a little ritual of hers." "A charming ritual," said Wimsey. "Rather Roman in its way. But even the ancients knew not to mix their wine with strychnine." Cicely stared. "Strychnine? A guess, Miss Forbes. Nothing more. Though if one were minded to murder a maiden aunt with old-world habits and a trust fund, breakfast might be a capital time to do it. Few people expect to die before toast. Inspector Frimpton of the County Constabulary chose this moment to make his entrance, boots freshly mudded and moustache bristling with rural indignation. "Lord Peter!" I suppose it was too much to hope that a quiet death might remain in quiet hands. "Dear man," said Wimsey, "it is always too much to hope. Miss Trafford, I fear, has had her last mimosa, and we are all the poorer for it." Frimpton harumphed. "Natural causes more than likely. Old woman, odd diet, possibly an aneurysm." "Possibly," said Wimsey, "though aneurysms are rarely served in champagne glasses." He handed over the flute, the handkerchief still knotted neatly around its stem. Frimpton grunted. "We'll see what the doctor says." "Yes," said Wimsey, "but do have a word with the kitchen maid about the eggs. If she's poisoned the yolks again, we're all in danger." He moved to the window then, peering out over the frost-rimed lawn with the expression of a man scanning the crossword in the Times and finding it unworthy of his talents. Behind him, the house stirred. Quiet voices, hasty footsteps, the flickering tension of a household not quite certain whether it is relieved or scandalized. Miss Cicely Forbes had sunk into a chair, her hands folded in the precise manner of the well-bred when suspected of something appalling. The butler, Everly, had quietly begun polishing the silver with furious devotion, and Reverend Pargeter had turned his thoughts to the possibility of a postponed harvest supper. Wimsey remained at the window, one hand in his pocket, his other lightly drumming the sill. He wore the faintest smile, like a cat contemplating an empty birdcage and wondering how the latch came open. "Well, well," he said aloud to no one in particular. Aunt Lavinia took her champagne with a twist. Let's see what else she stirred in. Frimpton, not a man to brook aristocratic levity before lunch, had already dispatched a constable to fetch Dr. Pilking, the local GP, whose brisk manner and whiskers conveyed a sense of medical competence, largely untroubled by questions of subtlety. In the meantime, the inspector busied himself interrogating the household with all the delicacy of a man rummaging through a cravat drawer with greasy fingers. Lord Peter, by contrast, meandered, though one could hardly call it wandering, so precise were his apparent aimless movements, through Deverell House, pausing before the great-grandfather clock in the hall, as if it had whispered something scurrilous in his ear. Miss Cicely Forbes had not moved from the drawing-room, nor had she touched the second cup of tea poured for her by an unnervingly silent parlour-maid. Her spine remained iron-rod straight, her hands still clasped over her pale yellow gloves, one of which bore a faint champagne stain. She seemed neither distraught nor particularly surprised. One might have thought her irritated that events had spiraled into something inconvenient and unscheduled. "It's extraordinary," she said after a time, as if continuing a private argument. "She was speaking perfectly well when I left the room. I came back 5 minutes later and she looked as if she'd fallen asleep." "Quite," said Wimsey, who had drifted back into the room and now regarded the tea service with a sommelier's gravity. "I say, Miss Forbes, did your aunt always take her champagne unchilled?" "She liked it at room temperature," Cicely replied. "She said the cold gave her toothache." "Indeed. So you brought the bottle last night?" "You opened it this morning?" "No, Everly did, at 9:15. And Miss Trafford poured her own glass. She always did. It was a little thing with her, ever since she caught the housemaid watering down her whiskey 3 years ago. After that, no one touched her drinks but herself. And you were where?" "In the breakfast room. I left to fetch my wrap. It was cold. When I came back, she'd taken her seat in the drawing room and was sipping." "Alone?" Cicely hesitated. "The butler had gone to answer the telephone. There was no one else." Wimsey nodded faintly, then turned his gaze to the tall sash window overlooking the eastern lawn. The light outside was shifting. That watery autumn gold that comes before the sky turns to pewter and the wind begins to complain of draughts. He watched it for a moment with the expression of a man attempting to remember the second verse of a poem he hadn't yet realized he'd forgotten. "Who phoned?" he asked suddenly. "Oh, I don't know," Cicely said. "You'll have to ask Everly." "I shall." He did not ask at once, however, but rather slipped out once again, as though the house itself were speaking to him in shuffles and shadows. He passed the morning room, oddly tidy, and peered briefly into the library where the poker lay ever so slightly skewed in its stand. The study was locked. Curious. Down in the servants' corridor, the air smelled of polish and resignation. Wimsey paused beside the kitchen, where a plump, pinched woman stood rolling pastry with the methodical violence of one who secretly resents all mammals with hands. "Mrs. Hatch," he said amiably, "you've kept the butter cold this year." "I hope." The cook blinked at him. "It's been a wet October, my lord." "As it often is. Tell me, was Miss Trafford in good spirits this morning?" "Much the same as ever, quiet. Took her breakfast in the blue room as usual, half an egg and her biscuit. No signs of unusual health, pallor, shortness of breath?" Convulsions? Mrs. Hatch's eyes narrowed. She didn't say nothing. To me, but she never did much. She weren't what you'd call warm. No, more of a temperate climate. One last thing. Was the champagne bottle already opened when you saw it? I don't touch drink. That's the butler's job. And so it was that Wimsey found himself once more in the butler's pantry, where Everly sat polishing a silver salver with the dedication of a Trappist monk under oath. Everly, I believe. You opened the bottle this morning, the man inclined his head. At precisely 8:43 a.m., my lord. Very precise. I keep a journal of such things, my lord. Housekeeping standards must not fall. God preserve us from laxness, murmured Wimsey. And the telephone, who was it? A Mr. Denholm rang from the solicitors in Tunbridge. Wells, regarding a codicil to Miss Trafford's will, she asked not to be disturbed. I relayed the message. Ah, she made no mention of the call to her niece. I could not say, my lord. And the bottle, where had it been kept? In the breakfast-room sideboard, as instructed by Miss Forbes. Was it chilled? No, my lord. Room temperature, as Miss Trafford preferred. Wimsey turned. This over. You did not leave the bottle unattended? I was out of the room for no more than 2 minutes, answering the telephone. Miss Trafford entered just as I hung up. She poured her glass then, and drank it at once. She took it into the drawing-room. She always waited until the clock struck 9 before sipping. A woman of rituals. Yes, my lord. Wimsey was quiet. Then he said quite casually, Everly, when was the last time you replaced the sideboard's key? Everly blinked. It was changed last spring, after the theft of a port bottle. The key was kept in the butler's safe. And who had access? Only myself. Not even Miss Forbes? No, my lord. I see. Thank you. Wimsey took the side corridor, back toward the main hall, passing again the grandfather clock, which ticked with the measured arrogance of the upper classes. He paused to check the time against his pocket watch, made a note of a 4-minute discrepancy, and smiled faintly. Dr. Pilking had arrived, smelling of carbolic and tweed. He made short work of the preliminary inspection and pronounced with confidence. Congestive. Heart failure likely. There's some rigidity, but nothing that couldn't occur within the time frame. Age. Poor diet. These women, who live alone and don't walk, they accumulate faults like motor cars. Wimsey listened, nodded, and said nothing. He took his leave with a flourish that was barely noticeable and found Cicely still seated where he'd left her. Miss Forbes, he said gently, how well did you know your aunt's solicitor? I never met him, she replied. Only heard the name. Mr. Denholm, you said? Yes. Odd, isn't it, that she would revise her will yesterday and today find herself expired. Her eyes flickered. Are you suggesting? Merely observing. He turned, then paused. By the way, Miss Forbes, do you recall what book your aunt was reading this week? Something by Bulwer Lytton, I think. Appropriately. Gloomy, murmured Wimsey. But no, there's a bookmark in the 3rd chapter of The Mysteries of Udolpho. Wouldn't it be delicious if she were indulging in Gothic horror just before breakfast? Cicely said nothing. Her silence was beginning to feel curated. Wimsey smiled, bid her good morning once more, and went in search of the sideboard. He had a faint suspicion that a second bottle had once rested there, a bottle whose presence, like so much else in this house, had been carefully, almost tastefully removed. He whistled an air from The Marriage of Figaro, quite off-key, and vanished down the corridor, leaving the drawing-room in stillness. Something he knew had been slipped into the morning routine, a sour note among the silver. The question now was, who had composed it? Wimsey took the back stairs 2 at a time, the banister polished to a treacherous gleam. On the landing, he paused by a brass-framed mirror and regarded himself with a faint expression of apology, as if interrupting some deeper reflection. The upper corridor was hushed, A sheen of dust glimmered along the skirting boards. A faded watercolour of cows, inscrutably bucolic, hung beside a door labelled Miss Trafford, Blue Room. He tapped once and entered without waiting for an answer. The room smelled faintly of lavender sachets and something older, dry paper, faint decay. The furniture was stiff-backed, the kind that suggests a moral objection to comfort. A delicate breakfast tray, now cleared of food, sat upon a side table. Whimsy glanced at it. The cup bore no lipstick trace. The spoon, a dainty silver thing, had been used to stir something into the tea, still faintly clotted at the base. He picked it up with his handkerchief and sniffed. A faint tang, citrusy, acrid, not lemon, something more medicinal. He pocketed the handkerchief and turned toward the writing desk. Letters sat in a neat stack, the top one half sealed, addressed to Mr. Denholm of Denholm and Carswell. He lifted it delicately. The letter inside, written in a hand so precise it might have been etched, read, "Dear Mr. Denholm, regarding our discussion, I have given the matter further thought. It is my wish that the codicil remain private until I am able to discuss it personally with Cicely. She must not be caught unawares, and I do not wish to make alterations out of pique. Please hold the document in confidence until I telephone again. Yours, J.T." Whimsy considered this for a long moment. A woman writing a private amendment, pausing before committing, no trace of rashness, not the behaviour of one anticipating imminent demise. Yet she was now very cold indeed. He opened a drawer. Neat bundles of correspondence, dusted with that peculiarly dry scent of age. Several from her niece dated over years, most brief, some even tender. Others were from someone named G.T., always initialed and written in a more hurried hand. Gladys Trafford, perhaps, Whimsy murmured. Or Gavin, though that's unlikely. We'll ask Cicely about G.T. before long. It never does to let initials go unremarked. He turned as a shadow fell across the threshold. Inspector Frimpton stood there, his moustache now visibly bristling, as if offended by the decor. "Poking about again, my lord," the man said. "One must poke where the dust lies thickest," Whimsy replied. "Have you spoken to the housemaid yet?" Frimpton made a dismissive gesture. Claims she found nothing amiss. Miss Trafford rang for her warm water at 7:30, same as always. "And the bottle of champagne? Was there, to your knowledge, any suggestion it might have been tampered with prior to opening?" Frimpton sniffed. "We'll have it tested. But between you and me, Dr. Pilking's not convinced there's anything in this but a failing heart. The lady was past 70 after all." 76, corrected Whimsy gently, and not unaware of her arteries, which she carefully tended with a regime of biscuits, bicarbonate, and bourgeois restraint. "Still, let's indulge the notion that she died naturally. Doesn't the timing strike you as inconvenient?" Frimpton grunted. "What do you mean?" "Just as she's altering her will, just as her solicitor is put off with promises of clarification. And let's not forget she died alone, having poured her own glass from a bottle accessed by only one man, and yet consumed after that man had left the room." "Everly?" Frimpton said doubtfully. "He's been here 30 years. A great many things happen after 30 years, said Whimsy mildly. Retirement, resentment, or perhaps gratitude, rather poisoned. Frimpton sighed. "You'll be asking about motives next." "Indeed I shall. Let's begin with the obvious. Miss Forbes, what do we know?" "Returned from Paris 3 weeks ago," Frimpton said, producing a notebook. "Staying with her aunt indefinitely. According to Hatch, they got on well enough, no rows. Financial state? Miss Forbes, reasonable allowance from her parents' estate, but no independent fortune. And no prospects?" Frimpton sniffed. "If you believe the gossip, she broke off an engagement last year. Something about a Mr. Wrexham, stockbroker." "Always fatal," Whimsy murmured, a stockbroker in love, so no husband, no fortune, and a very wealthy aunt considering a new codicil, one begins to feel the pulse. Frimpton raised an eyebrow. You think she did it? I think, said Wimsey, she may know more than she admits. But that is not the same thing, is it? He stepped past the inspector and descended the stairs once more. The house seemed quieter now, as if holding its breath. A door creaked, somewhere, discreetly. Wimsey turned toward the study, the one he had found locked. This time, the key lay conspicuously on the hall table. "Left out for me?" he asked the air. It did not reply. The study smelled of leather bindings and burnt matches. A fire had been hastily lit and more hastily extinguished. Wimsey moved to the grate and saw within the ashen mess several scraps of singed paper. He coaxed them out gently and pieced together what he could. Considered rather more generous than advisable. Cicely must not know before the original draft destroyed. He stared at them, faint smile fading into a sharper crease of interest. Miss Trafford had been preparing to discuss something sensitive, something she feared might upset her niece. She had burned the original draft of the codicil, yet left enough behind to suggest misgiving. Why hesitate? Unless she had reason to doubt her own safety, or feared a quarrel might tip into something worse. He returned to the drawing room, where Cicely now stood at the hearth, absently twisting a glove between her fingers. "My dear Miss Forbes," he said lightly, "I fear I must trespass once more upon your patience. Your aunt seems to have intended to speak to you regarding a change to her will. Did she ever broach the subject with you?" "No," Cicely said at once. Then, after a breath, "Though I knew she'd been in correspondence with her solicitor. She asked me to leave the room yesterday while she telephoned. I assumed it was about investments." Wimsey nodded, watching her. "And did she seem troubled?" Cicely hesitated. "No more than usual. She was often abrupt, especially when dealing with business. She disliked sentimentality. And what of GT, the letters in her desk?" Cicely frowned. "I haven't the faintest idea. Perhaps a cousin. Or—" She stopped. "Yes?" "There was a woman she used to visit in the village, Gladys Trenham. She was ill, I think. Aunt Joan would take things to her, bottles, letters. They weren't friends exactly, but there was something about it." Wimsey's expression grew speculative. "Would Miss Trenham, by chance, still be alive?" "She might be," said Cicely. "I haven't seen her in years." "Then I believe it's time for a short stroll. Never trust a village secret to stay buried, especially when it's buried under kindness." He took his hat from the stand, made a little bow to the lady, and stepped outside into the damp air, the sky now sagging with rain. As he walked toward the village road, his steps light despite the rising wind, he murmured to himself, "Aunt Joan, a codicil, and a bottle of untasted generosity. One might call it an inheritance of silence, until someone poured a little too much truth into a glass." And the house behind him remained very, very still. The village of Netherfield was a fragment of a gentler time, hemmed in by neat hedgerows and lanes that twisted like forgotten ribbons. Wimsey had often remarked that such places, with their picture postcard facades and polished civility, could harbour secrets as bitter and tangled as any city back alley. This evening was no exception. The rain had subsided, leaving the air damp and heavy with the scent of moss and wet earth. Street lamps flickered uncertainly, casting long shadows that lengthened with each step. Wimsey's coat collar was turned, up against the chill. His hands were thrust deep into his pockets as he ambled toward the village green, where a faint glow marked the Black Swan Inn. The sort of place where parish secrets ferment alongside the ale, he mused aloud, though only to himself. His destination was not the inn, but a modest cottage set a few yards behind it, partially obscured by gnarled lilac bushes now heavy with rain. It belonged to Gladys Trenham, or, as Cicely had suggested, the mysterious G.T., whose letters had been so carefully guarded. The gate protested with a creak as Whimsy pushed it open. He noted that the garden was overgrown, the path uneven, as if neglected for some time. It struck him as odd that Miss Trafford would maintain such a friendship with someone so clearly living on the fringes. Perhaps there was more to this bond than mere charity. Whimsy tapped gently at the door, then waited. There was a faint shuffling sound within. Then the latch lifted and a thin, pale face peered out. "Mr. Whimsy, isn't it?" the woman asked, her voice a whisper cracked by years of wear. "How did you know where to find me?" "A felicitous guess," Whimsy replied with a faint smile. "I am investigating the sad death of Joan Trafford, your acquaintance, yes?" Her eyes flickered with a shadow of something. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Yes, yes. I knew Joan well. She was kind to me when no one else would be." "May I come in? It will be quicker, and I promise not to trouble you." After a brief hesitation, she stepped aside. The interior was cramped and cluttered, a dim light casting wavering shadows over stacks of unopened letters, yellowing photographs, and a small, battered writing desk. A faint mustiness lingered, mingled with the faint scent of lavender. "I understand Miss Trafford corresponded with you often," Whimsy began, "and that you have some knowledge of her intentions concerning her will." Gladys nodded, settling into a threadbare chair. Joan was a proud woman, but she knew her time was coming. She was changing things, making sure Cicely didn't inherit everything without question. She said Cicely might not understand the truth. The truth? And what might that be? The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. There was more to Joan's past than she let on. A second life, if you will. Not in the usual sense of scandals or affairs, but secrets that could ruin reputations. Whimsy inclined his head. "Secrets are the currency of the deceased, are they not?" Gladys gave a brittle laugh. "They are. Joan once confided in me about a man, an old friend, someone from before she came to Netherfield. He had been involved in something dark, something that could threaten the family name. Did she name this man? No, always evasive, but she feared him deeply. She said if anyone found out, it would undo everything she had built." Whimsy's mind raced, matching this new piece against what he had learned so far. An old acquaintance lurking in the shadows of the past, potentially a motive for silencing Joan before she could finalize her changes. And what of Miss Forbes? Did Joan confide in her niece about these fears? Not that I know of. Joan was distant with Cicely, more distant than usual since her return. I think she feared a quarrel might erupt if the truth came out. Whimsy stood, thanking Gladys for her candor. "You have been most helpful. One last thing. Did Joan ever mention the bottle of champagne, the one she drank before her death?" Gladys's eyes narrowed. "She always kept champagne for special occasions, but that night I heard no celebration, more like resignation. Thank you." Whimsy stepped out into the moist evening, the pieces shifting before his eyes like shadows at dusk. His thoughts returned to the house at Netherfield as he retraced his steps. The loneliness of the old woman, the invisible ties binding past and present, and the quiet desperation masked by the polished surface of civility. Upon arrival, he found Inspector Frimpton conversing with Hatch, the elderly butler, whose face was carved from granite and who showed little enthusiasm for revisiting the scene. "Anything new?" Whimsy asked. "Not much," Hatch replied, polishing an already gleaming silver tray. "Miss Trafford was particular about her champagne, only the finest vintage, and never allowed it to linger." "And who else had access to the bottles besides Everleigh?" "Only Miss Forbes, I believe. She helped with the table service sometimes. Though I must say, Miss Forbes has been a quiet one since she arrived." Whimsy's gaze lingered on the tray. Was anything unusual about the bottle that night? Hatch frowned. Not that I recall. Except that Miss Trafford had not poured herself a second glass, which was odd. She usually did. Perhaps she was interrupted. Could be. Or perhaps something held her attention. Frimpton coughed. Whimsy, the toxicology report is back. No poison detected. Which does not exclude other means, Whimsy said, softly. I still have questions about the timing. Who precisely was in the house at the moment of Miss Trafford's death? Only Everly, Hatch and Miss Forbes. No visitors recorded. Everly was downstairs when she drank the champagne? Yes, preparing the evening meal. And Miss Forbes? Upstairs, in her room. So, it was she who found the body? Yes. She called the doctor immediately. Whimsy folded his arms. Which doctor? Dr. Pilking. A faint smile touched Whimsy's lips. I must speak with him at once. In the study, he examined the cluttered desk anew. There, nestled beneath a pile of ledgers, lay a small notebook, the spine cracked and the cover worn. Opening it, he discovered a series of entries in Joan Trafford's precise hand, dates, appointments, names, most innocuous, save for one. 17th April, meeting with J.T., clarify codicil wording, the same initials as the letters. Whimsy paused, fingers tracing the page. J.T., he muttered, a coincidence or a cipher. He pocketed the notebook and prepared to leave when the doorbell rang sharply. Frimpton opened to reveal Dr. Pilking, his usually confident manner edged with unease. Whimsy, the doctor said. There's something I neglected to mention. Miss Trafford's heart was indeed weak, but there was a faint trace of digitalis in her system. Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Digitalis? The foxglove tincture. An old remedy, but a dangerous one in excess. Pilking nodded. Exactly. It could have caused sudden cardiac arrest, but the dose was small, barely enough to be therapeutic. So, accidental or deliberate? Difficult to say. She took digitalis daily, but not in such quantities. Someone might have altered the dose. Whimsy's mind snapped into focus. And the bottle of champagne? Still a mystery. The cork was intact, no evidence of tampering. But the cup, the glass she drank from? The doctor took samples for analysis. We wait. Whimsy stepped outside, the cool night air bracing. His thoughts raced along the delicate threads woven through this tragedy. The secret visitor from the past, the enigmatic codicil, the wary niece, and a subtle poison lurking beneath the surface. Returning to the vicarage where Cicely was staying, Whimsy found her sitting by the fire, a book of Byron open but forgotten on her lap. He seated himself beside her. Miss Forbes, I must ask, when was the last time you saw your aunt alive? Just before dinner, she replied, eyes distant. She was reading letters, tense but composed. I tried to speak with her about the codicil, but she waved me away. Did she seem afraid? No, not afraid. Determined, yet troubled. And this Mr. Wrexham, your former fiancé? She blushed faintly. He was, persistent. But I ended it before coming home. I wanted to care for my aunt. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. It seems, Miss Forbes, that your return has stirred more than just old family ties. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? There are shadows in Joan Trafford's past that reach beyond her years here. And some of those shadows may have followed her home. For a moment, silence reigned between them, heavy as the dusk outside. Then Cicely whispered, I want to know the truth. Whimsy smiled faintly, the ghost of an arch expression. As do I, my dear, as do I. Outside the night deepened, and Netherfield held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game far older than any of its polished walls. Whimsy's mind churned as he departed the vicarage, the damp chill of early morning settling in with the creeping fog that began to cloak Netherfield's lanes. The village, serene on its surface, was suffused with an undercurrent of unease, like a finely tuned instrument, just slightly out of harmony. There was a peculiar rhythm to the events, a cadence that refused to align neatly with the apparent facts. And it was in this dissonance that Whimsy found his clue. He made his way back to the Trafford estate, a grand old house that seemed to sag under the weight of its own history, much like the family it sheltered. The oak panelling and faded tapestries whispered of faded glories and unspoken scandals. If a place could hold grudges, this one did. His first visit was to the drawing room, now cordoned off as the crime scene, a room bathed in the cold light of dawn through heavy curtains still drawn against the day. Inspector Frimpton was there, pacing quietly, notebook in hand. "Good morning, Whimsy," Frimpton greeted, his tone less brusque than usual, a sign that the previous evening's revelations had unsettled even his practiced demeanor. "Morning, Inspector. I've been turning over the timeline in my head. It's curious. One's entire investigation can hinge on the precise moment a clock ticks." Frimpton raised an eyebrow. "I gather you've been scrutinizing the house clocks again." Whimsy nodded, stepping closer to the grandfather clock standing sentinel by the fireplace. "Indeed. You may recall I mentioned the discrepancies in timing. I requested all clocks be checked for accuracy and synchronization." "Results?" "Most were correct to within a minute, save for the hall clock, which runs fast by exactly 6 minutes. One might dismiss that as a mere quirk, but it's a vital detail when reconstructing a sequence of events." Frimpton frowned. "Go on." "Consider this. Miss Trafford's last known interaction was purportedly at 7:15 p.m., as noted by Everly. Yet Everly's account, when cross-referenced with the hall clock's error, shifts the timeline, bringing the interaction closer to my 7:21. It may seem trivial, but in an investigation where minutes matter, this is substantial. Meaning the window in which the fatal act occurred is narrower than we supposed. If Everly's recollection aligns with the hall clock rather than the corrected time, then her timeline cannot be entirely trusted." Frimpton gave a grunt of agreement. "I see what you mean, but Everly has been consistent." "Consistency is not always synonymous with accuracy," Whimsy said dryly. "Memory, particularly under stress, is an unreliable witness." His gaze drifted to the curtains, thick damask in a deep burgundy, heavily lined to block out light and sound. "Tell me, Inspector, are these curtains soundproof?" Frimpton shrugged. "Not exactly soundproof, but thick enough to muffle most noises." "Ah, but not entirely." "I took the liberty of testing the fabric myself last evening," Whimsy admitted, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "From the garden, one can hear faint conversation from the drawing room when the windows are open. The curtains, however, dull even those faint sounds." "So?" "So if the windows were closed and the curtains drawn, it would be virtually impossible to hear any disturbance within. Yet Miss Forbes claims to have heard a glass shatter from upstairs, which seems implausible given the house's layout and soundproofing." Frimpton rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You believe someone is lying? Or mistaken, possibly both?" "The notion that Miss Forbes was upstairs, hearing the fatal moment, doesn't quite hold." Before Frimpton could respond, Hatch entered, holding a small, delicate object wrapped in cloth. "Found this in the servants' quarters, sir." Whimsy took the package, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a silver salver, the kind often used for serving tea or small refreshments. Yet this was no ordinary tray. Along its rim was an engraving, an intertwined double T. "An heirloom, perhaps," Whimsy mused. "One might expect such an item to be in the drawing room or dining area, not tucked away with the servants." "Indeed, sir," Hatch replied. "I don't recall seeing it before." Whimsy turned it over, examining the fine workmanship. A detail worth noting. Miss Trafford had a penchant for preserving family artifacts, yet this was conspicuously absent. Frimpton nodded. Could it have been taken or hidden? Possibly. Items like these often have significance beyond their apparent value. Whimsy's thoughts flickered back to Gladys Trenham's insinuations of a secret past and the enigmatic J.T. Miss Trafford's coded notes suggested someone involved in legal matters, perhaps a solicitor or an old family confidant. Inspector, have you obtained any information on this J.T.? Frimpton nodded briskly. Yes, John Trentham, a solicitor with an office in the nearby town of Ashbridge. He dealt with the Traffords' estate affairs some years ago. Whimsy's smile was wry. I shall pay Mr. Trentham a visit forthwith. Later that morning, Whimsy found himself walking the narrow, cobbled streets of Ashbridge, the air tinged with the scent of baking bread and coal smoke. Trentham's office was an austere affair, dominated by rows of leather-bound ledgers and the faint aroma of ink and dust. The solicitor was a thin, nervous man, with a twitching upper lip and spectacles perched precariously on his nose. He welcomed Whimsy with polite but guarded civility. Mr. Whimsy, how may I assist you? Mr. Trentham, I understand you had dealings with Joan Trafford concerning a codicil shortly before her demise. Trentham nodded. Yes, Miss Trafford was revising her will. She wished to ensure certain bequests were altered, somewhat delicately. Delicately indeed. Might I inquire whom these changes concerned? The solicitor hesitated, then glanced toward a cluttered filing cabinet. There was mention of a Miss Cicely Forbes, her niece, and another party, one Miss Gladys Trenham, a former acquaintance. Whimsy's brow arched. An intriguing coincidence of initials. Indeed. Miss Trafford wished to bequeath a modest sum to Miss Trenham, though this was controversial within the family. Controversial in what sense? Trentham swallowed. Well, Miss Trenham's background was somewhat checkered. A troubled youth, some say. Joan wished to help her, but the rest of the family was opposed. Whimsy tapped his fingers on the desk. And this second identity, did Miss Trafford express concern about it? Not explicitly, but she was very cautious. I recall a conversation about a certain gentleman from her past, someone she feared might contest the will or seek to disrupt the family's reputation. And this gentleman? A Mr. James Telford, a man with whom Miss Trafford once had a business partnership that ended badly. There were rumours, but nothing concrete. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. A man to watch, then. Quite so. Leaving the solicitor's office, Whimsy's mind turned over the threads in his hands. The codicil, the mysterious J.T., the soundproof curtains, the misplaced heirloom, the faint trace of digitalis, all connected in a web that, while intricate, was beginning to reveal its pattern. Back at Netherfield, he requested to see the servants' quarters. The cramped rooms bore the usual signs of neglect, but one detail caught his eye, a small window left slightly ajar despite the chill. Outside, footprints in the dew marked a path toward the garden. Everly, may I have a word? Whimsy asked, summoning the housekeeper. Yes, sir? Is this window usually kept open? Everly looked surprised. No, sir, it must have been left that way by accident. Or intentionally, Whimsy suggested. The housekeeper's eyes flickered, but she said nothing further. His gaze traced the footprints, noting their size and direction. They led toward the rose bushes by the back wall, precisely where Cicely. Forbes said she had been walking earlier that evening. Whimsy felt the familiar stirrings of the game's next move. The timeline was fracturing, alibis beginning to crumble. He returned to the drawing room, where Inspector Frimpton awaited. The servants' quarters hold a loose thread, Whimsy said. A window left ajar, footprints in the dew. I suspect Miss Forbes's account may require closer scrutiny. Frimpton nodded. I'll have the footprints cast and compare shoe sizes. Good. Meanwhile, I shall review the medical reports once more. There is a subtlety here, an artifice not yet uncovered. As the day wore on, the village stirred with its usual quiet bustle. unaware that beneath the veneer of normalcy, a tempest brewed. Whimsy, ever the conductor of this dark symphony, prepared for the next measure, knowing that with each note the truth drew nearer, its edges sharper, and its revelation more uncomfortable for all involved. The stage was set, and the players, knowingly or not, were moving into place. The devil, as always, was in the details. The evening sun, waning and pale, filtered through the stained glass of the Trafford Library, casting prismatic shards upon the rows of books whose spines bore the dust of forgotten arguments and erudite quarrels. Lord Peter Wimsey stood by the window, pipe in hand, staring not at the idyllic view of the gardens, but at the jumble of evidence sprawled on the desk before him. Witness statements, medical reports, a scattering of pressed flowers found in Jones' boudoir, and that elusive silver salver with the double T. The matter of Miss Cicely Forbes' alibi weighed heavily upon his mind. Her demeanour during their brief exchange was one of composed innocence, yet the footprints outside the servants' quarters told a tale divergent from her account. The window left ajar was no mere accident. It was a breach in the fortress of precision the household prided itself upon. Wimsey tapped his pipe thoughtfully. One must wonder, Inspector, why the window was left open, especially in this chilly season. Frimpton, who had joined him moments earlier, shrugged. Carelessness, perhaps? Or deliberate concealment, Wimsey mused. And if so, by whom? The inspector's eyes narrowed. The footprints we cast earlier, shoes size 7, feminine with an unusual sole pattern, matches Miss Forbes's. Boots. Curious, Wimsey said. She claims to have been walking near the rose bushes at the time of the murder, correct? Yes, she mentioned needing fresh air. A nervous habit, she claimed. Yet the open window near the servants' quarters would place her nearer the crime scene itself, in a more intimate proximity than previously admitted. Wimsey's mind raced through possibilities, weighing each with the meticulousness of a scholar balancing equations. If Miss Forbes had been nearer to the scene, what was she doing there? What did she hope to hear or see? He returned to the medical reports with renewed attention. The subtle presence of digitalis in Jones' system was an enigma, given no prescription was on record and none of the family were known to require such medication. Yet digitalis is a slow poison, its symptoms easy to mistake for natural causes: faintness, irregular heartbeat, fatigue. Frimpton, Wimsey said quietly. Miss Trafford's death was not an instantaneous act, but a carefully timed unravelling. The poison had been administered some time before the fatal moment in the drawing room. Then someone close to her had to be aware, the inspector agreed. But who? Wimsey considered the household again, the family and servants whose lives were so tightly interwoven that any sudden disturbance would send ripples through the fabric of daily routine. Gladys Trenham's cryptic warnings and evasive answers were another thread yet to be pulled. Her presence at the vicarage with Joan only days prior was more than a casual visit. There was tension beneath the surface civility. Returning to the servants' quarters, Wimsey found Everly polishing silver with an almost frantic diligence. Her eyes betrayed a weariness not explained by the early hour. Everly, Wimsey began gently. Do you often see Miss Forbes walking about the estate at odd hours? The housekeeper looked up sharply. No, sir, not really. She keeps to herself mostly. And yet a window near the servants' quarters was left open the night of the murder. Do you know how that came to be? Everly hesitated. Well, I can't say for certain. I think I saw Miss Forbes near that window just after 7. Wimsey's eyes brightened. Indeed. And what was she doing? Just standing there, sir. Looking in, I think. Looking in. At what, do you suppose? Everly shrugged, visibly uncomfortable. I don't know, sir. Maybe she was waiting for someone. This new revelation complicated matters further. Cicely Forbes might have been eavesdropping, or perhaps watching for an opportunity, either to intervene or to conceal something. Whimsy's lips curled in a faint smile. Intriguing. Meanwhile, a call from Dr. Philpott, the local physician, shed additional light on the matter. He had reviewed the toxicology and was convinced the poison's administration was surreptitious. Digitalis can be administered through food or drink without immediate detection, the doctor explained over the telephone. A glass of wine, perhaps. Whimsy's thoughts immediately turned to the champagne Joan Trafford had insisted upon that evening, a detail previously dismissed as frivolous indulgence. Had the champagne been laced? The bottle was missing from the drawing room, and no one could recall seeing it after the gathering began. He made a mental note to investigate the source and whereabouts of the champagne, aware that such a commonplace item could hold the key to unveiling the murderer's subtle artifice. The following day, Whimsy arranged to meet Cicely Forbes again, this time with a more pointed purpose. She received him in the parlour, her composure tighter than before, her eyes shadowed by a veil of fatigue. "Miss Forbes," Whimsy began, "I have been reflecting on your movements the night of the murder. You stated you were walking near the rose bushes, yet evidence suggests you were closer to the servants' quarters." She blanched slightly but recovered with a brittle smile. "I confess, Lord Peter, I may have been wandering more than I admitted. The estate is large, and I often find solace in its quiet corners." "Indeed. And yet you were near the open window?" "Yes." "Did you hear anything?" She hesitated. "I thought I heard raised voices." "Voices belonging to whom?" "I cannot be certain. It was too faint, muffled by the curtains. Possibly Miss Trafford and someone else." "Was this before or after the glass shattered?" "Before, I believe." Whimsy leaned forward. "Miss Forbes, I am sure you understand the importance of precision. Your testimony is a cornerstone of this investigation. Would you not agree that withholding information even inadvertently may hinder justice?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "I was afraid, Lord Peter. Afraid of what might be uncovered." "Fear is a poor advisor in such matters," Whimsy replied with quiet severity. "But it is also a human one." The conversation ended with an uneasy truce, and as Cicely closed the door behind him, Whimsy felt the noose tighten around the truth. The rose bushes, the open window, the muffled voices, all pieces of a puzzle demanding to be joined. Later that afternoon, Whimsy summoned Gladys Trenham to the library. Her nervous energy was palpable. She wrung her hands as she seated herself. "Miss Trenham," Whimsy began, "you once mentioned a secret past involving Joan Trafford. I would be grateful if you could illuminate this shadow." Gladys swallowed, then spoke haltingly. "Joan and I were acquainted years ago before she inherited Netherfield. There were difficulties. A business partnership gone sour. A man named James Telford was involved." "And this Mr. Telford?" Whimsy pressed. "A man of considerable influence but questionable ethics. Joan feared he would attempt to undermine her. Did you know him well?" "Only through Joan's stories. But I feared his return might herald trouble." Whimsy observed her carefully. "And your relationship with Joan at the time of her death?" "Complicated," Gladys admitted. "We had our disagreements, but I would never wish her harm." Yet the look in her eyes betrayed a conflict deeper than mere regret. Frimpton, who had quietly entered, interjected, "Miss Trenham, where were you the evening Joan died?" "I was at the vicarage with the Reverend," she answered promptly. "Can anyone corroborate this?" The hesitation was slight but present. "The Reverend can." A note of skepticism flickered in Whimsy's gaze. "I shall wish to speak with him at my earliest convenience." As the day faded into dusk, Whimsy stood once more in the drawing room, piecing together the strands of deception and truth. The timeline, now precise and sharply defined, revealed the choreography of murder, not as a spontaneous act of passion, but as a calculated, measured performance. The missing champagne, the muffled voices, the open window, and the secret will. Each was a movement in a subtle dance of jealousy, fear, and control. Wimsey lit his pipe and exhaled a plume of smoke that drifted languidly into the heavy air. Justice, he mused aloud, is rarely a sudden illumination. It is instead a slow dawn dispelling shadows, each detail a sliver of light. He glanced toward the door where the players in this grim drama lingered, unaware that the curtain was about to rise on the next act. And somewhere in the stillness, the truth waited, patient and unyielding. Lord Peter Wimsey sat once again in the shadowed recesses of the Netherfield Library, the heavy curtains drawn against the early evening chill, the low fire crackling and sending flickering light across the rows of books and his thoughtful face. The quiet of the room was deceptive, for beneath its stillness lurked the tension of converging secrets and concealed motives. The detail of the missing silver salver gnawed at him still. The household insisted none had seen it since the afternoon tea, yet its absence at the critical moment raised the suspicion of purposeful concealment. The salver was no mere ornament, it bore the crest of the Trafford family, a symbol of their lineage and pride. To misplace it was one thing, yet in a household where order was upheld with the rigor of a monastery, such a lapse was unthinkable. His musings were interrupted by the soft but deliberate knock at the door. It was the Reverend Henry Bellingham, vicar of the parish, and one of the few gentlemen in the vicinity with a direct relationship to the late Joan Trafford. He entered with a measured gait, his clerical collar crisp, his hands folded neatly, as if in perpetual prayer or concealment. "Lord Peter," he said, inclining his head, "I trust I am not intruding." "Not at all, Reverend," Wimsey replied, rising with a courteous gesture. "Please be seated. I wish to speak with you further about the evening in question and your whereabouts." The Reverend sat, his gaze steady but somewhat guarded. "Of course, I was at the vicarage preparing my sermon for Sunday until late. Gladys Trenham can attest to my presence." "Yes, I have heard as much. But I must inquire about your relationship with Miss Trafford. How well did you know her?" Henry Bellingham adjusted his glasses and sighed softly. Joan was a complicated woman, strong-willed, generous in charity, but troubled by matters she confided only to me. She had fears regarding certain family matters and a lingering distrust of outsiders. "Outsiders such as Miss Forbes, perhaps?" Wimsey ventured, noting the vicar's slight tightening of his lips. The Reverend cleared his throat. "I cannot speak ill of the dead, Lord Peter. Cicely was a niece, estranged for years, yet I suspect the truth of their relationship is more tangled than family gossip admits." Wimsey nodded. "I have heard suggestions of tensions within the household, including your own reservations about Miss Trenham. That is true. Gladys has a troubled past, as you doubtless are aware. But I hoped she had reformed." "Hope is a fragile thing in such matters," Wimsey observed. The Reverend leaned forward. "There is something I must confess. On the night Joan died, I received a letter. It was cryptic, warning of a betrayal close to home. I feared for her safety, but was uncertain whom to trust. Did you share this with anyone?" "No. I feared the wrong ears might hear. I spoke only to Gladys, who suggested caution." The web of secrecy deepened. Wimsey pressed gently. "And this letter, do you still have it?" "Regrettably, no. I destroyed it after reading. I did not wish to inflame panic. Indeed, one must be cautious with evidence and emotion alike." The vicar's confession was unsettling, yet it provided a thread, an unseen hand manipulating from the shadows. Wimsey's mind returned to the matter of the soundproofing in the drawing room, the muffled voices Miss Forbes had heard. If Joan feared betrayal, the tension of that evening was no accident. Later, with the vicar's departure, Wimsey considered the implication of concealed correspondence. Who would benefit most from secrecy? The family, the servants, or an outsider? And why was the matter of the will still shrouded in silence? His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Gladys Trenham, summoned at his request. She entered with hesitation, as if each step was a negotiation between fear and obligation. "Miss Trenham," Wimsey began, "your loyalty to Joan is noted, yet your reticence suggests more than mere grief. You spoke of a man named James Telford. Who was he, truly?" Gladys swallowed and looked away. "James was my brother. He was involved in dubious enterprises, and his presence brought unrest to Joan's life." Wimsey's eyebrows lifted. "Your brother, you say, and his dealings threatened Joan?" "Yes. He attempted to claim part of her estate through forged documents and threats." "Did Joan confide in you about these threats?" "Only in part. She feared for her safety, but would not involve the authorities." "And on the night of her death, was Mr. Telford in the vicinity?" Gladys shook her head. "No, he was elsewhere, but I have reason to believe he sent an agent to Netherfield." Wimsey nodded slowly. "An agent to do what, precisely?" Gladys hesitated. "To coerce Joan into relinquishing her claim." The picture grew more complicated. Wimsey wondered if the poisoned champagne had been the agent of coercion, a subtle threat masked by elegance. To test this, he requested the assistance of the local constable to trace the champagne's provenance. It was revealed that the bottle had been specially ordered for a private occasion, its delivery a matter of some secrecy. Meanwhile, Wimsey continued to probe the servants' quarters. Everly, the housekeeper, admitted that a new footman, recently hired and somewhat furtive, had been seen loitering near the cellars. The man's name was Albert Marsh, and he had given vague answers about his past. This discovery was a fresh thread: Marsh's arrival and his connection to the bottle's delivery. When confronted, Marsh faltered under Wimsey's scrutiny. His alibi for the night was weak. He claimed to have been polishing silver near the servants' hall, but no one could confirm this. Wimsey's suspicions were piqued. "Mr. Marsh, is it true you have associations beyond the household that might explain your discreet activities?" Marsh's eyes darted nervously. I have no interest in such things, sir." "Tell me, Mr. Marsh, what of the silver salver? Are you aware it is missing?" The man paled. I cannot say, sir." Wimsey pressed further, noting the flicker of guilt or fear. Simultaneously, the timeline of the evening's events began to reveal inconsistencies in Marsh's statements and the reported movements of Miss Forbes and Miss Trenham. The three seemed to orbit the scene at overlapping times, yet none admitted to interaction. The late hour found Wimsey back in his study, the elements of a psychological drama assembling with each revelation. The poisoned champagne was no accident, but an instrument of subtle vengeance or manipulation. The missing salver, the open window, the furtive new footman, the secret letter, all threads woven into a tapestry of betrayal. Wimsey mused on the nature of guilt and complicity. The murderer was no mere brute, but a master of psychological chess, weaving fear and uncertainty to cloak their act. As midnight approached, a quiet resolve settled over him. The solution was near, and with it, the unmasking of the shadow that had fallen over Netherfield. Tomorrow would bring questions to the vicarage, confrontations with the household, and perhaps the revelation of a secret that none wished to expose. The stillness, Lord Peter Wimsey's mind was as sharp as ever, the gears turning toward the inevitable moment when the truth, no matter how well concealed, would emerge into the cold light of day. The dawn crept grey and reluctant over Netherfield, casting long shadows through the ancient oaks that framed the estate like silent sentinels. Lord Peter Wimsey having spent a restless night in reflection and re-examination of the facts, rose with the determined calm of a man who has glimpsed the shape of the unseen pattern. The morning air was crisp, but bore the faint scent of damp earth, as if the land itself whispered secrets just beneath the surface. With his customary slow precision, Wimsey donned his coat and strolled towards the servants' quarters, seeking out Albert Marsh once more. The young footman's nervous demeanour had left an indelible impression, a faint tremor betraying his attempt at concealment. Finding Marsh by the scullery door, scrubbing a stubborn stain, Wimsey approached without ceremony. "Mr. Marsh, a moment, if you please." The footman straightened abruptly, eyes flickering toward the nearby windows as if seeking escape. "Yes, my lord?" Wimsey's voice was calm but edged with iron. "I have been considering your statements from last night, and the curious coincidence of your arrival at Netherfield just days before Lady Joan's demise. It is an unusual time to seek employment in such a household, would you not agree?" Marsh swallowed visibly. My circumstances are private, my lord. I mean no harm." "Indeed," Wimsey said, eyeing him thoughtfully. "Yet you must forgive my curiosity. You are not, as you claim, merely a footman seeking honest work, are you?" The footman's jaw tightened, and he glanced down at his hands. "I came here for reasons I am not proud of. My brother, James Telford, he sent me." The name fell heavy between them, a dark echo in the otherwise decorous halls. "And what precisely was your brother's interest in Lady Joan Trafford?" "To recover what he believed was owed to him," Marsh admitted. "Money, land, a legacy. He thought Lady Joan was withholding what was rightfully his." Wimsey nodded slowly. "And were you to persuade Lady Joan then?" "No. I was to find proof. Evidence that might compel her to relinquish her claim." "Proof? Or a pretext?" Wimsey pressed. "The poisoned champagne, for instance. Did you have any knowledge of it?" Marsh hesitated, then shook his head. "No. I swear it was not my doing." "Very well," Wimsey said. "But you were seen near the cellars where the champagne was stored. Can you explain your presence?" "I was fetching more silver polish." "For the trays?" Marsh replied quickly. "I meant no ill." The inconsistency in his timeline was troubling. Wimsey made a mental note to cross-examine this with Everly, the housekeeper, whose stern gaze and rigid discipline governed the servants like a matron of an abbey. With Marsh dismissed for the moment, Wimsey turned to the household's other mystery, the vicar's cryptic letter. The absence of a physical copy was frustrating, but he resolved to speak once more with Reverend Bellingham. Perhaps the vicar's sermons might yield clues, or his confidences betray more than words. The vicar's study was modest, lined with worn volumes of theology and classical literature. The Reverend himself appeared more subdued than the previous evening, the weight of his secret etched across his features. "I have considered your letter, Reverend," Wimsey began, "and your fears for Lady Joan's safety. Do you recall any particular threats she mentioned, names, places, events that might help me?" Henry Bellingham shook his head. "Only vague intimations. She spoke of shadows at the window and whispers in the dark, phrases that sounded fanciful at the time but now haunt me." Wimsey smiled faintly, a trace of irony colouring his tone. Gothic phrases no doubt meant to unsettle the imagination rather than indicate genuine danger. "Perhaps," the vicar conceded, "but one cannot dismiss the feeling of unease that pervaded the house. Even the servants whispered of strange noises, footsteps when none should be walking, doors left ajar despite the careful locks." "Indeed, the open window," Wimsey mused aloud, recalling the detail brought forth earlier by Miss Forbes. "A small oversight or a deliberate invitation?" The vicar's eyes darkened. "I fear the latter. Joan was tormented by someone within her circle. It was a subtle cruelty, but relentless." Wimsey leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And your own role in this? You mentioned confiding only in Miss Trenham. Is she to be trusted?" Henry Bellingham's gaze was steady, but Whimsy detected a flicker of hesitation. Gladys is a complicated woman, fiercely loyal, but with a past that shadows her. I trust her better than most, but even she may conceal things. That aligns with my observations, Whimsy remarked. Her connection to your household and the introduction of Marsh suggests an uneasy alliance. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock. The housekeeper, Everly, entered, carrying a heavy brass tray. Her stern expression softened slightly upon seeing Whimsy. I hope I am not intruding, she said. But there is something you should see. She laid the tray upon the desk and lifted a folded piece of paper from beneath it. Whimsy recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Joan Trafford's. The letter was brief but pointed, a note, addressed to the vicar, dated just 2 days before her death. It spoke of a meeting to discuss urgent matters of family and legacy, warning that not all can be trusted, even among kin. Whimsy's mind raced. The letter confirmed Joan's suspicions and suggested a final attempt to confront or resolve the threat. He glanced at the housekeeper. Did anyone see this letter delivered or know of its contents? Everly shook her head. It was kept secret by Lady Joan. I only found it when tidying the study. The vicar took the letter with reverence. This changes much. Whimsy's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Indeed, the missing salver, the poisoned champagne, the open window, they all point toward a carefully orchestrated plan. But who? Henry Bellingham murmured. Someone close, with knowledge of the household's routines and weaknesses, Whimsy said. Someone who could manipulate time and space, opening windows, placing poison, removing evidence, without arousing immediate suspicion. His thoughts returned to Cicely Forbes and Gladys Trenham, the niece and the housekeeper, whose interactions remained opaque. The theatrical rivalry hinted at in earlier conversations suggested deeper layers. Whimsy decided it was time to speak, once more with the two women together, to observe their interplay and perhaps provoke the reveal of a critical detail. Later that afternoon, Cicely and Gladys were summoned to the drawing room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Whimsy observed them closely. The sharp glint of Cicely's gaze, the tight-lipped reserve of Gladys, both women acutely aware of each other's presence. I have learned much since last we spoke, Whimsy began, including the existence of this letter and the involvement of Mr. Marsh. Cicely's eyes flashed. Albert Marsh? What interest would he have in family affairs? More than you might suspect, Whimsy said gently. But I am more interested in your relationship, ladies. You have known one another for years, yet recent estrangements suggest deeper discord. Gladys's voice was low but firm. We have had our differences. Miss Forbes came here suddenly, disrupting the household's delicate balance. And yet, Whimsy continued, you both hold pieces of a puzzle that may unlock the mystery of Lady Joan's death. Cicely smiled thinly. If that is so, Lord Peter, why have you not disclosed what you know? Because, Whimsy replied with a twinkle, a puzzle left half solved is more telling than any confession. The two women exchanged wary glances, the fragile veil of civility thinning. Whimsy pressed on. Tell me, when did you last see Lady Joan alive? Gladys answered first. I was in the kitchen preparing for the evening meal. And you, Cicely? I was upstairs arranging my things. I had no reason to disturb her. Yet both of you heard voices in the drawing room shortly before the tragedy. Yes, they replied almost simultaneously. And what did those voices say? Neither answered immediately. Perhaps, Whimsy suggested, there is more to that evening than mere happenstance. As the light faded, the shadows lengthened around the faces of those present, hinting at truths still concealed beneath layers of deception. Lord Peter Whimsy knew that the theatre of this mystery was far from over, and that the final act would demand the sharpest wit and the steadiest nerve. For now, the pieces lay poised on the board, awaiting the move that would bring the unseen into sight and the guilty into the cold embrace of justice. The dusk had deepened to a velvety twilight as Lord Peter Wimsey remained seated in the drawing-room, his sharp eyes studying the expressions of Cicely Forbes and Gladys Trenham. The subtle shifts in their countenances, the tightness around the eyes, the fleeting quiver of a lip, spoke volumes in the quiet room where words seemed to hover, unspoken yet heavy with meaning. "It strikes me," Wimsey began, leaning forward, slightly, "that your voices, heard shortly before Lady Joan's death, might have been discussing matters more pressing than household routine. Could you share what was said?" Cicely glanced at Gladys, a flicker of reluctance passing between them before she spoke. "We were debating the upcoming will. Lady Joan had confided that there would be changes, decisions that would affect us all." Gladys nodded, adding, "She wanted to ensure fairness, but not everyone was pleased with the direction." A quiet tension filled the room. Wimsey allowed the silence to linger before pressing further. "Fairness, you say? In whose eyes, I wonder?" "Lady Joan was always just," Gladys said firmly, "but she was also aware of debts owed. Some to family, some to outsiders. It made for difficult conversations." "And Mr. Marsh," Wimsey inquired, "his brother's claim, did that figure into these debts?" Cicely's eyes narrowed. Yes, James Telford believed Lady Joan had hidden assets, but she was meticulous in her records, nothing was missing. "Yet someone tampered with the champagne," Wimsey reminded her. "Poisoned it, in fact." Gladys shifted uncomfortably. Who would dare such a thing? "The question of daring or desperation," Wimsey said, "is at the heart of this mystery. But to proceed, I must return to a detail that seems trivial, yet now appears crucial: the missing silver salver. It was used to serve the champagne, was it not?" "Indeed," Cicely confirmed. "Lady Joan had a silver tray she prized, but it vanished after the night in question." "I would like to examine the servants' quarters and the cellars once more," Wimsey announced. "There may be overlooked clues there." At his request, the household was soon abuzz with subdued activity. Cicely and Gladys exchanged glances that mingled suspicion and unease, their roles in the unfolding drama growing ever more complex. Wimsey's first stop was the cellar, a cavernous space with brick arches and heavy oak shelves laden with bottles. He scanned the area carefully, noting the dim light and the cool air thick with the smell of aged wine. Close to the back, near a small window high above, he found disturbed dust, an impression of footsteps, perhaps recent. He knelt to inspect the floor and spotted faint, scuffed marks that suggested a hurried exit. Near a stack of crates, his fingers brushed a fragment of fabric, a dark thread caught on a splintered edge. He bagged the piece carefully, recognizing it might tie to one of the household's inhabitants. Back upstairs, Wimsey sought out Albert Marsh again. The footman appeared more withdrawn than before, his eyes avoiding direct contact. Wimsey chose a gentle approach. "Mr. Marsh, I found a clue in the cellar, a fragment of cloth. It might relate to you or someone you know." Marsh's face paled. "I don't know anything about that." "I am not accusing you," Wimsey said softly. "But if you are to help clear your conscience, you must be truthful. Do you recognize this fragment?" Marsh hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It looks like a piece from my brother's coat." The revelation sent a chill through the investigation. James Telford's involvement deepened, suggesting a clandestine presence within Netherfield's walls on the fatal night. Wimsey's next call was to the village constable, Mr. Harding, who had shown quiet competence in handling the initial inquiries. At the small police office, Wimsey examined the constable's notes and inquired about recent visitors to Netherfield. "Not many," Harding replied. "Besides the family and usual staff, there was an unfamiliar man seen lurking near the east gate, a man fitting Telford's description, I believe." "Did anyone confront him?" No, sir. He was elusive, disappearing before anyone could approach. The constable's report confirmed a shadow moving through Netherfield, reinforcing the theory of a calculated infiltration. Returning to the house, Wimsey found himself walking the halls alone, the silence amplifying his thoughts. The interplay of family tensions, hidden debts, and shadowed figures began to align like the pieces of a grim mosaic. A sudden sound broke the quiet, a soft knock on the study door. It was Cicely Forbes, her demeanour less guarded now. "Lord Peter, may I speak with you?" He gestured to a seat. "Of course, Miss Forbes." She sat down, clasping her hands tightly. "I fear that in all this, the truth about Gladys may be overlooked. She is fiercely protective, yes, but also fearful. Something weighs on her heart." Wimsey considered her words. "What do you suppose she hides?" "Not just secrets of this household, but perhaps her own past. I have heard whispers, rumours, that before coming here, she was involved in a scandal. Scandal or no, her actions on the night of Lady Joan's death are vital to understanding what transpired," Wimsey said. Before Cicely could reply, a sudden crash echoed from the kitchen. Below, both rose, moving swiftly to the source. There they found Gladys standing amidst shattered plates and overturned chairs, her face pale and drawn. "Are you injured?" Wimsey asked. "No," she whispered, voice trembling. But someone left a message. On the floor lay a torn scrap of paper scrawled hastily, "Speak no more or suffer the same fate." The menace was unmistakable, a warning from the unseen hand that had orchestrated the poison, the stolen salver, the shadows creeping through Netherfield. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "We are closer than ever to the truth. But the enemy knows. We approach." That night, the house settled into uneasy quiet, the servants retiring with nervous glances, the family cloaked in anxiety. Wimsey sat by the window of his room, piecing together the timeline and relationships, his mind racing through the labyrinthine threads. A knock at his door startled him. He opened it to find Albert Marsh, trembling but resolute. "I must tell you what I know," Marsh said. "My brother did not act alone. There is another, someone within the household who helped him." Wimsey's interest piqued. "Who?" Marsh swallowed hard. "Gladys Trenham." The accusation hung heavily in the air, and Wimsey knew that tomorrow would bring confrontations unavoidable. As the night deepened, the house of Netherfield held its breath, poised on the edge of revelation, while outside, the first cold drops of rain began to fall, whispering secrets into the darkness. The revelation lingered in the air like a shadow, thick and foreboding. Albert Marsh's words echoed with an uneasy weight. Gladys Trenham, the loyal housekeeper, complicit in a dark conspiracy. Lord Peter Wimsey sat back, steeling himself against the upheaval this news promised. The night's rain tapped insistently against the window panes, a steady rhythm underscoring the tension that gripped Netherfield. "You must tell me everything, Mr. Marsh," Wimsey said quietly, his gaze steady and commanding. Marsh hesitated, glancing nervously toward the darkened hallway as if fearful that unseen ears might be listening. "My brother James was desperate. He believed Lady Joan's fortune would secure his future, but he knew the family guards its secrets fiercely. He sought an ally inside the household, someone who could provide access, and Gladys was that person." Wimsey nodded slowly, piecing together the implications. "And she agreed?" Marsh swallowed hard. At first, it was just passing information, where the keys were kept when the household was most vulnerable. But then, the plan escalated. Gladys helped my brother procure the poison. She arranged for the salver to be moved so it could be used to serve the champagne. "An act of betrayal indeed," Wimsey said, his voice low but edged with sorrow. "Did Gladys have her own motives beyond aiding your brother?" Marsh looked down, shame flooding his face. She She said she was tired of being a servant, of being invisible, overlooked. She wanted more than her station allowed: money, influence, freedom. The housekeeper's stern demeanour had concealed a restless ambition, one that had turned deadly. Whimsy's thoughts flickered to Cicely Forbes. Had she sensed this undercurrent? Was the rivalry between the niece and the housekeeper merely a surface manifestation of deeper resentments? "Thank you, Albert," Whimsy said at last. "Your honesty will be crucial." Marsh nodded, relief mingled with dread. "I fear Gladys suspects I might betray her." "Then you must be cautious. I will confront her, but only when the moment is right." With Marsh dismissed to his quarters, Whimsy dressed and moved deliberately through the quiet house, his mind mapping the terrain of secrets and lies. The vicar's words returned to him, the whispers in the dark, the shadows at the window, and he understood now that this was no random act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated betrayal from within. He found Gladys in the dimly lit kitchen, her back to him as she wiped down the wooden counters with methodical precision. The tension in her shoulders was palpable. "Gladys," Whimsy called softly. "May I have a word?" She turned, eyes guarded but resolute. "Of course, my lord." Whimsy regarded her for a long moment. "I know what you have done, and why." Her composure cracked just for an instant. "You cannot understand." "Try me," he invited gently. She took a deep breath. "I was desperate, years of servitude, invisible and dismissed. When James came to me, I saw a way out, a chance for something better. I never meant for Lady Joan to die." "But you did what you could to make it happen," Whimsy said. "You tampered with the poison, moved the salver, helped conceal the evidence." She lowered her gaze. "I was blinded by hope and fear. I thought we could make a new life from the wreckage." "And the warning you left for us," Whimsy pressed. "To keep silent?" "That was to protect myself. I feared retribution, if the truth came out." Whimsy studied her, the lines of remorse and resolve etched deep. "You will face justice, Gladys. But first you must answer one more question. Who else was involved? Were you acting entirely on your own with James Telford, or did others know?" Gladys shook her head slowly. "Only James and I." Yet Whimsy felt a shadow of doubt. The complexity of the scheme suggested additional hands. He dismissed her for the night, but resolved to keep a close watch. The following morning, as the first pale light filtered through heavy curtains, Whimsy convened with the household. The air was thick with anticipation. Servants whispered anxiously, and the family's pale faces revealed their own apprehensions. Whimsy addressed them with deliberate gravity. "We have uncovered a conspiracy that led to Lady Joan's death. It involved deception, betrayal, and greed. But the full truth remains just beyond reach." He turned to Cicely Forbes, who met his gaze steadily. "Miss Forbes, I believe your presence here was no accident. You know more about this than you have revealed." Cicely's cheeks flushed. "I was wary of Gladys, yes, but I did not know of her involvement." "Then who else could have wished harm upon Lady Joan?" Whimsy asked. "This question must be answered." There was a pause, then a timid voice came from the corner. It was the village maid, Mary, whose usually bright eyes were shadowed with fear. "I saw someone last night near the east wing," she said quietly. "A man, tall, dark coat, moving quickly. I didn't recognize him." Whimsy's pulse quickened. "Did you see his face?" "No, sir. But he carried a small package, like a parcel wrapped tightly." "Where did he go?" Mary pointed toward the west garden. "I think he entered through the gate by the old greenhouse." Whimsy exchanged a glance with the vicar, who nodded thoughtfully. "It seems the conspiracy may extend beyond the household," Whimsy mused. "We must investigate the grounds and question those with access to the garden and greenhouse. The group dispersed, the atmosphere charged with a mix of fear and determination. Whimsy took a solitary walk toward the garden, the early morning mist curling around his feet like a living thing. The greenhouse loomed ahead, glass panes dulled with age and neglect. The gate creaked faintly as he pushed it open, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling his nostrils. Inside, the stillness was profound, broken only by the faint drip of condensation. Whimsy's eyes caught a glint near a shelf, a small package wrapped in coarse brown paper tied with string. He retrieved it carefully, unwrapping to reveal a vial of clear liquid and a folded note. The note read simply, "The truth will cost more than you know." Whimsy's mind raced. The vial might be the poison source or an antidote. The note was a challenge. Suddenly footsteps approached. He turned swiftly to see Cicely standing at the entrance, her face pale but determined. "Lord Peter, I thought I might find you here," she said softly. "There is something I must confess." Whimsy nodded, gesturing for her to continue. "I feared that Gladys was involved, but I was wrong. The true mastermind is someone no one suspects." "Who?" Whimsy asked, the moment thick with tension. "It is Reverend Bellingham." Whimsy blinked, surprise flashing across his features. "Henry has been playing us all," Cicely said. "He knew of Lady Joan's intentions to alter the will and stood to lose greatly. He used Gladys and James to execute his plan." Whimsy considered the accusation. It fit the pattern, the cryptic letter, the whispered threats, the vicar's somber warnings. "Then we must confront him at once," Whimsy said. Together, they moved swiftly through the house, arriving at the vicar's study where the Reverend was waiting, calm but with a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "Oru." "Peter," he greeted, "I presume you come with accusations." Whimsy's voice was steady, his gaze unflinching. "Yes, you orchestrated Lady Joan's death to protect your interests." The vicar smiled thinly. "You are clever, but you lack proof." "Yet you left a trail," Whimsy replied, "involving the poison, the salver, and the threats." Henry Bellingham's facade cracked, his hands clenched. "You think me a villain, but I acted to preserve the church's legacy and my family's future." "By murder?" Whimsy challenged. "Justice will decide." As constables moved in to arrest the vicar, Whimsy felt the tangled threads of deception finally unraveling. The truth, as always, was darker and more intricate than any had imagined, but justice at last would be served. The room fell silent as the constables led Reverend Henry Bellingham away, his composure shattered beneath the weight of irrefutable evidence. Lord Peter Whimsy watched thoughtfully, the faintest crease forming between his brows, not of confusion, but of contemplation. The threads of deception had been painstakingly unraveled, exposing a web spun with ambition, greed, and betrayal that had nearly destroyed a family and stained a household with tragedy. Cicely Forbes stood nearby, her expression a mix of relief and lingering sorrow. "I never imagined Henry capable of such cruelty," she murmured. Whimsy nodded slowly. "It is often those closest to us who conceal the darkest secrets. Appearances can deceive, and trust, once broken, is not easily mended." Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking, casting a soft glow over Netherfield's ancient stones. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm that felt both cleansing and tentative, as if the estate itself were cautiously exhaling after a long-held breath. In the days that followed, the household began the slow process of healing. Gladys Trenham, though implicated in the plot, agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation, her remorse genuine. The Telford family, though shaken to their core, found some solace in the truth and the prospect of justice. Lord Peter, meanwhile, prepared to leave Netherfield. His role as observer and solver had concluded, but the echoes of the tragedy would linger in his mind, a reminder of the fragile line between order and chaos. Before departing, he paused at the threshold, looking back at the house where so many Lives had been forever changed. Truth is the light that reveals the shadows, he reflected quietly. And though it may not always bring comfort, it is the only way forward. With that, Lord Peter Wimsey stepped into the new day, the mystery solved, but the world's complexities ever unfolding before him. The case closed, but the pursuit of justice and understanding would continue, always.